So if I told you there was a bi-timbral 8-voice vintage polysynth from Sequential that you could have for under $1,000, would you take it? Let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Zach Marr from Alamo Music here in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications. This is our Alamo Sound Lab channel where we talk about all things music tech related. And today we're talking about the forgotten Split 8, a bi-timbral synth from Sequential that had 8 voices, and I couldn't believe that I hadn't heard about this and that people don't talk about it more regularly. This is clearly a synth that time has forgotten, and the question is, was it rightly forgotten or was it wrongly forgotten? And you could still find these for under $1,000. I mean, the going rate seems to be about $1,000. There's another version called the Pro 8 that was made for the Japanese market. The Split 8 was for the US market, and these belong to this category of synth that really is like mid to late 80s when the big analog manufacturers were struggling because Yamaha disrupted everything with the DX7. The trend towards digital was fully underway, and the greats from the previous era were trying to find their way. And the Split 8 was targeted at the Japanese market. They wanted to, I guess Sequential wanted to introduce a product in the Japanese market to compete with Korg and Roland and Yamaha. And so they contracted a company in Japan to build the Pro 8 to release the model over there. And there's two rumors about what happened next. So the rumor one was that company that they contracted said, you need to release this in the US under the Split 8, or we're going to sell it to Korg, and they're going to do it. And so they strong-armed Sequential into releasing the Split 8 in the US, the design that they basically had done. And the second one was that Sequential really liked the synth and just asked them to tweak a few things and then released it themselves because they didn't want Korg or someone else to take the design and release it in the US themselves. So who knows which of those stories is true? They're just both floating around. If either of them are, I thought they were entertaining, so I wanted to tell them. But this is based on the 3394 Curtis chip, which is like a synth-in-one chip, and there's a lot of negative things said about this chip. It has the VCA, VCF, VCO all in a single chip. A lot of people say it sounds thin. You find it in other synths like the AX60 from Akai. I think it's in the 6 tracks from Sequential as well, which is another kind of forgotten, the multi-tracks and the 6 tracks from Sequential, another kind of iteration of this late Sequential analog polysynth era. But let's talk about, is it any good? Is it interesting? Why is it still so cheap? And before I even get into that, I do have a question. There's a kind of a mystery. Who was this Japanese manufacturer that was building all these synths for the American companies? You know, the Chroma Polaris, you have the Oberheim, I think the Matrix 12 was also built in Japan. So you have a lot of these synths that were built in Japan for US companies, but no one actually seems to know who the manufacturer was. It's not public knowledge, it's not on the internet. I'd be very curious if someone can solve that mystery so the internet can know. But I cannot for the life of me find who this company was that built Akai synths, who built Sequentials and built the Chroma Polaris. No one seems to know. So if you know, please leave a comment below. I think that would help that kind of synth history online project. So let's get into this. It is interesting. It does not, to me, sound like a Sequential synth. It's not what I associate with a Sequential sound. It sounds like its own thing, and honestly, it sounds a little bit B-brand. It sounds like a budget movie from the 80s. It definitely has like a mid-80s sound. The Chroma Polaris has a similar vibe. It's got a better sound, much more interesting sound, but there's this like kind of apocalyptic analog depressing sound that these synths, it's not happy and poppy. in my opinion. It's very much like or soundtrack music to B movies from the 80s is what it sounds like, a Lifetime movie that you might see on TV, which is kind of fun. It's kind of kitschy and campy in its own way. It's not bad, but it's definitely strange. It's real nasally in some ways. It's got a nasal sound, and it's the controls. It's a matrix of controls. The polymod section, it's got a polymod thing, which is, nomenclature you find in a lot of sequential synths, but really it's more of like a feedback loop between oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. It just, or no, scratch that. It's just a feedback loop that kind of creates this interesting effect. It's not particularly interesting. It has a chorus, which is cool. It's a single oscillator synth, but you can stack, which is nice. You can stack patches, you can split them, stack them, and reduces the polyphony to 4 voices. It has unison. Everything else is pretty basic, and it's kind of step controlled on the filter. It's like 0 to 15. It's not super detailed. There's only so it's not. Can't get super deep into sound sculpting, and it's still kind of a pain with having to click buttons around. But it's got its own sound. So let's take a listen and wrap up with some final thoughts. So there you have it, the Split 8. You know, it doesn't sound bad. It definitely is an analog synth, polysynth, and it's fairly inexpensive. I don't know what to compare it to, but it definitely belongs in this like latter 80s analog sound, which not a huge fan of. I don't hate it, but it's interesting. It's interesting. You would think with the specs, just the bi-timbrality and the 8 voices, that this would be kind of legendary in its own right, but it really feels kind of underwhelming. But it's fun. It sounds decent, and for under $1,000 or even $1,000, it's a lot of value for an analog synth. So definitely its own thing. Campy, kitschy, if that's your thing. Maybe this is the right one for you. I think it would be fun to make some period piece music, but I don't know about its modern applications as much. And the polymod thing, I think what it is it sends the audio signal out to the filter. So it's like a feedback loop. That's, I think, what it technically is. I need to look it up. You can search online and find it, but wanted to mention that before signing off. So really, is it worth the 1,000 or 800 or 700 bucks? I don't know. To be honest, it's a little boring, little vanilla. I think there's probably modern things that are more interesting, but definitely an interesting piece of history, and wanted to cover this one in particular. I was excited to get it, disappointed to play it, but excited to share it again with you. Please leave me your thoughts below if you have different opinions about the Split 8 or the multi-tracks or the 6 tracks. We're going to cover those later, but a very interesting period of time for Sequential, kind of the late twilight years of their first iteration. If you didn't already hit the subscribe button, turn your notifications. We'd love to see you here again. And if you would like to talk more, come find us at albummusic.com. Hope to see you there soon. Talk to you later.